Hello, I'm Dick Corsell, and you're watching Community Care Network Connections. Community Care Network is a parent organization of Rutland Mental Health Services and Rutland Community Programs. And today we're going to talk about the closure of the Brandon Training School. 20 years ago, in 1993, the Brandon Training School closed after having been open since 1915. And we're going to talk with some people about how organizations like Rutland Mental Health Services and its Community Access Program have stepped in to fill community needs following the closure of that Brandon Training School. So I'd like to introduce my guest for today's show. Right here to my immediate left is Jim Wade. Jim is a shared living home provider who's caring for people in his home. Next to Jim is Jan Sherman, and Jan is from the Office of the Public Guardian, and Jan oversees many of these home providers in terms of helping with the coordination of services and ensuring that people's needs are getting met. She'll explain a little bit more about that as well. And then Melody Bell, who's also a shared living home provider. So I welcome all three of you to the program. This is a very interesting topic, and it's hard to believe it was 20 years ago that the Brandon Training School closed. I'm going to start with you, Jan. The Brandon Training School, many people, of course, in this region who have been around for a while would remember the Brandon Training School. But could you talk a little bit to our viewers in terms of what the Brandon Training School was, some of its history for those that perhaps are not quite as familiar with what that entity was?
Brandon Training School was, like you said, established in 1915, and it became the residence for, at the beginning, for many indigent people, but also individuals who at that time were classified as mentally retarded. That term has since been changed to developmentally disabled. And it became the place where families who were unable to care for their loved ones placed folks. And over the years, they lived there the rest of their lives, the majority of them, until later in the 70s, 80s, 90s, when the training school began to think about closing. And individuals lived in dormitories and were cared for by staff. And can you think of anything else?
Well, we all, when we started back in '79, I think we both started in '79, and I started in a dorm that had adolescent co-ed. It was girls and guys and stuff, and it was a little different than some of the other dorms and stuff, but we enjoyed it immensely, working with the youth and stuff like that. And I don't know what else we want to.
What I remember most when I worked at Brandon, all three of us actually worked at Brandon and were part of the closing of Brandon Training School. But we did work very hard to try to make the life of the individuals that we cared for very positive. But it was an institution, and as such, you had 5 staff caring for 20 people, sometimes 4 staff caring for 20 people, and there was not much individuality, time for individuality with the folks. So I think that was what was most difficult. Most of the time was spent caring for basic needs. And while staff did their best to make it an appropriate living environment, it was an institution.
Sure. Let me ask you, 20 years ago, why did the Brandon Training School close? I mean, what was the reason for the closing? What was the impetus for the closing? And how many people were affected in terms of people that were residents that were actually living at the Brandon Training School at the time?
The population reached its height in the late 1960s. And in the 70s, there was a movement to place individuals who were more capable out into the community. And many of these folks lived in what were called community care homes. They were just large boarding homes, but these were, again, folks that were more independent, had more skills. But in 1996, there was a class action suit, and the Developmental Disabilities law was passed because Vermont Legal Aid in conjunction with individuals who lived at Brandon Training School. They wanted to be able to leave Brandon and have be able to live in the community and have services. So this law was passed in 1996, and that was kind of the impetus for the eventual closing of Brandon. And from 1996 until 1993.
You mean 1986? Are we talking?
Did I say 96?
Yeah.
No. Yeah, I apologize. 1986, wrong year. From 1986 until 1993, the state of Vermont worked closely to create the developmental services agencies that now support folks like Community Access Program, and began to work on a system of creative supports, which turned into mainly the shared living provider model that we see today, where most individuals were moved into private homes. There were some group homes developed in the state too for some of folks that required a little bit more attention, and there was one or two at the time more medically homes with more medical oversight. There's one in Rutland here today. Right. To serve the needs of folks. So slowly these community mental health centers all across the state started to develop their ability to support folks in the community, and it began.
I'm going to ask you, Jan, about the Office of Public Guardian, because as I said before, Rutland Mental Health Services, and we've featured the Community Access Program on several of these PEG TV shows. In fact, the facility you're talking about, Westview Court,
Correct.
was one of our earliest programs highlighting what that medical model looked like for residents of that, and we've had a number of guests from Community Access Program, Rutland Mental Health Services. But what is the Office of Public Guardian? What is your role? You're independent, obviously, from Rutland Mental Health
That's
Services,
correct.
And so what is the role of Office of Public Guardian? How did that evolve?
I work for the state of Vermont. I'm a public employee, and the Office of Public Guardian came into being in, I think it was 1997, and that's when folks started to go out into the community, and they didn't have anyone to look out for their best interests. When folks lived at the Brandon Training School, the superintendent served as their guardian, and when folks left, they didn't have anyone in that role, and many didn't have families, so there was a need to create a program to oversee these folks and make sure that their rights were being protected and needs were being met. So that the program started in 1997 with 2 individuals, and it grew over the years as more and more folks left the Brandon Training School. And when it actually closed in the 90s, there were approximately 8 or 9 of us that worked at the Brandon Training School who applied for and became public guardians. And we have caseloads of about 30 individuals, and we are appointed by the court system to be the legal guardian for these folks and to oversee the quality of their services, ensure again that their rights are being protected. We work, of course, independently from the mental health agencies, and essentially we serve the individual. We just make sure that they're being cared for properly, that the services they need are being provided, and we advocate for the folks and make sure people can hear their voice. Sure.
Let me ask Jim and Mel, for both of you, start with Jim. Yep. When the announcement of the closure of the Brandon Training School was made,
yep.
And I'm assuming that there was a good period of time before that actually happened,
yep.
What was the reaction of employees and families to this? Was this something that you had long anticipated, you were planning on, you were looking forward to? What was it like at that time? And Mel, I want to hear from you too after Jim.
Well, at first, I think it was a big surprise for everybody, and not knowing if some of the consumers would fare well out in the community, and we didn't know what the economic thing would happen with the town of Brandon and stuff, because there's lots of employees, and well, you want to add to that, Mel?
Well, I think when we heard it was going to close, everybody was like, oh my, even though we had already taken consumers out into public certain days, we've done things in the community, but we still had the comfort of the institution for them. But I think a lot of us thought, okay, where's our jobs going to go from now? And even the town of Brandon, you know, there was a lot of people in that community that actually worked there. And but most of us had made a connection with the consumers that were in Brandon and wanted the best for them. And I think that opened everybody's eyes up to say, you know, these guys can be part of families, and it will work or we'll be back here, you know? That's one way some people were saying. But once the doors opened, it seemed like it just came together, with Rutland Mental Health kicking in, with the assistants and helping everybody coordinate day programs and getting them active, and the medical needs were being met. And that was more my concern, was, are these people going to have medical care that they always had? And they did. It came together. It was scary, no doubt. Looking back now, it's a good thing.
Oh, let me ask, and any of you can answer, all of you, but what was your role in the closing transition? I'm assuming you each had different jobs at the Brandon Training School. How did you go about helping with that transition to, I mean, what I just heard, Mel, was that despite, you know, the word shock, but the upset caused by the notification of closure, that somehow people really rallied, organizations rallied in order to ensure that that closing and that transition to community-based services was done in a way that seemed to minimize the negative impact. But I'd be interested to hear what it was like for you. What was your role in some of the closure?
Do you want me to talk?
Yeah, go right ahead.
I was a supervisor, program supervisor at the time, kind of overseeing 2 dormitories, and we would get calls from staff from the various mental health agencies who wanted to come down and meet the folks in the dorms. They would come down and talk with staff. I kind of looked at it almost like they were interviewing the individuals, you know, trying to find folks that would be compatible living up in their areas, you know, with the services that they could provide. And once the agencies determined, you know, who they would like to support, then the staff who knew the individuals best would actually take those individuals up to the new home or to the new group home and work with the new staff to train and try to get to know the person and what their needs were. So, you know, we really, I believe, I don't know if Mel, you were part of that or not because you left so early, but we would pair staff to go up, because we were pretty protective of our folks. We wanted to make sure that they were going into good homes, and the staff would come back and kind of report if there were concerns, and we'd try to have more than one visit, you know, so the folks could kind of get used to their new environment. But the staff were really active in that transition because they were essentially those individuals' family at that time. You know, they didn't really have natural family, many of the folks. And those that had natural family, they were the most difficult to convince that this was the right thing to do, because they were really scared for their children. They felt that Brandon, you know, with its protective walls, was the only place that they could live. And they also, because they couldn't care for their son or daughter in their home, they had a lot of skepticism about how could someone else care for their child. So there were some family members that were not happy with the closing of Brandon.
Yeah. Jim or Mel?
Well, at the time when I had left the institution, Brandon Training School, and had gone to work for Rutland Mental Health at the time, and then when I heard that it was going to be closing, the consumer lady that I knew well, I thought, you know, I want her to be part of my family, and I think it will work. And as Jan was saying, the interview process would come in, and you'd go in and have worked there and stuff, and knowing the staff, were able to come in and see if she was going to be compatible to my home and stuff like that. And in Rutland Mental Health, of course, with the day services and stuff, we just slowly transitioned these people into individual homes. the lady that lives with me didn't have a family involvement, so it was a little bit easier to transition her into my home and stuff, and it seemed to work out very well.
Yeah, let me ask Jim, as Jan had just said, for many residents of the Brandon Training School, that was their home and had been, in many cases, since early childhood. So I would imagine that for, in particular, the older you get, sometimes the harder change comes. But what was that like for some of those people who suddenly were told, hey, this home that you've known for like 20, 30 years, you can't stay here anymore?
I think overall it was difficult for people at first, and it took them a little while to adjust and stuff. But I think as time went on, it got a little easier, and they found out that it is possible to be out into the communities, and even the negative behaviors that people used to have sort of stopped having those behaviors. They were just more in line to acting out in a good, positive way as to the negative that we had seen in some of the dormitories and stuff. Back in the days, you know, one little incident would escalate to other things and through other people, and it was, you know, there's a lot of vibrant behaviors going on, as you remember, Jan. But all that, and I think with us having our fella, we've had him for 21 years and stuff, and it's just been great. And I mean, his health was an issue at first, so we waited an extra 8 months for him to move in, and then as he's getting older, because he's 75, he'll be 75 on November 1st here. He's no longer walking, and he doesn't have as many verbal skills as he once had. He still loves all the music and all the musicals and stuff like that. He loves to watch that stuff, and very animated. He loves Christmas, and so we've been very fortunate, I believe, with this whole deal. We sort of got a little bit of a jump on some people by my wife and I. We went to Florida and said, well, you know, who would we take if we were to think about someone moving in? And we chose our guy, and he's been with us for 21 years now. And we went through children that we had. Our girls were very, very young, and now we have grandkids that are 8 and 5, and he loves the children. It's really nice to see, and if you saw, you know, you'd get a lot out of that as well. But
well, let's take our foot out of the past and into the present. We're 20 years after the closure of Brandon Training School. Could we talk a little bit, Jan, have you start off in terms of how are the medical and social needs of individuals who were formerly served at the Brandon Training School, either having actually been there or would be eligible today if the facility were still open? How are those needs getting met now through programs like the Community Access Program or Rutland Mental Health Services, and how does that differ, other than the bricks and mortar institution, but how does that differ from the model that was at Brandon Training School?
Well, individuals today, their services are built on their specific needs. They're not built upon the need of a building or an institution or the amount of staffing that you have. Everything is developed based on the dreams, the goals, the wishes of the person. And that's different, obviously, because at the institution, you know, you were at the whim of the time of someone to take care of you or to take you somewhere. And when you're part of a family and you're the only person that's been brought in, and you have much more time, attention, ability of the caregivers to do things with you that you didn't get at the institution. Individuals are able to go swimming 3 times a week on a one-to-one situation, or go bowling and participate in music activities. And in the past, you were lucky if you were able to get out once a week, you know, to go for a van ride to do an activity at Brandon. You know, like Jim was saying, the medical needs with a single provider or a husband and wife, you get to know the person so intimately that you're able to really pay attention to their health needs and catch things earlier, get folks to the doctor, advocate more effectively because it's a one-on-one situation than kind of waiting for the doctor to come to you at the Brandon Training School, you know, a couple times a week, which isn't to say if there wasn't an emergency, folks weren't taken care of. They certainly were, but much more individualized services. And what I think I've found in the homes for all the individuals I support that have been in long-term homes is the feeling of safety, of knowing that they're in a place where they don't have to leave. And that took years and years, I think, to develop, that folks felt that this was their home, because it just doesn't happen overnight after you've lived in an institution. And when that happens, I think I've seen it in the individual you support, and actually in yours too, just their whole demeanor. There's so much, folks are so much more relaxed, and you could see how much they're enjoying their life. Whereas in the past, at the school, you always had to be kind of on guard and aware of, you know, was someone going to possibly hurt them, or when am I going to get my next meal? And they're provided for in these homes. They're part of the family. You don't have to worry about that.
Jim, you want to follow up on how things are different than they were? It sounds like very positive.
Well, for us, Donald, well, he was instantly family. He was loved by everyone, and at first, if we had family gatherings and stuff, it's overwhelming of stuff, of people that he didn't know and stuff. But he and I have a very large family, but and it just sort of grew, and he actually got very comfortable with having company over and such. It's just so much family oriented, and I think he thrived from that. Mm-hmm. And it's just more individually, and so
Joyce was the same, though. Mm-hmm. I mean, she when she first moved in, I'm going to tell you, it was difficult. I mean, for 6 weeks, I slept on the hall floor, so that because she wasn't used to upstairs, and her bedroom was upstairs in my home, and my fear was that she was going to come out of her room and fall down the stairs or something. So I actually slept in the hall to make sure that she didn't come out of her room not knowing where she was and get injured or something. She also had some institutional behaviors that we had to work on, where she was able to just go and roam into stuff, and whatever she wanted she would take, where I had to, this is your room, you know. And it took a while, but you know, it finally, the day she clicked in, I was like, wow, she's going to be okay. Because she was just used to having that roaming. There again, when you have a large group of people with one staff, you can't keep an eye on everybody. But with the one-on-one, she just fell right into it. It took 6 weeks to 2 months. At first I thought, you know, maybe I made a wrong decision. But I'll tell you, no. She has been with me 23 years, and she is unbelievable. She's grown up with my children, my grandchildren. I just can't, she's just a wonderful lady, and my whole family just adores her.
Now, let me ask, we've heard a lot about what the difference is. Jan, in your opinion, what's the biggest difference in the lives of these people now as opposed to had they been at Brandon Training School, or would they have been eligible for Brandon Training School? What's the biggest difference, do you think, in their lives now with the community-based model that we have versus the institutional model that was prevalent for so many decades?
They are treated as individuals. They're listened to, even if they don't have a voice. Their actions, their gestures, people pay attention to them, really try to determine what the person wants in their life, and they work really hard to try to put things in action so that they can have the best life possible.
Yeah, Mel, what about you? What do you think the biggest difference in the lives of
I think
these
their
people?
quality of life is amazing. They're just like independent individuals. They are an individual, and everything they've wanted or need is trying to be met, if not met. And I think their whole quality of life is really good right now, I feel.
Yes, Jim, how does the Community Access Program, which is part of a program of Rutland Mental Health Services, how does that support you? How do they help you being a shared living home provider?
Well, with anything that we've needed in the past, and there's been a few times where it was more challenging, and we had all the services, all the people involved that needed to be involved to get us through that. And I think that was the biggest reason why this all works for everybody as a whole, not just for me, but just seems like we have very good services with CAP here, Community Access Program. And we just have all our needs met, including our consumer, and
It's a team effort.
yeah.
What does that mean, a team effort?
Well, you have, with Community Access, we have medical on board, nurses, case managers, and guardianships, and it's a team that you know, and then you can discuss certain things that a consumer needs or you want met, and that team gets together and works on it, so it happens, and that the consumer's needs and your needs or our needs are met, and we're all on board, and it keeps everybody focused, and it works for the consumers, that making sure that their quality of life is addressed in all avenues.
So that support is absolutely critical in order for you to be successful, having people in your home and being able to keep them in a community-based setting. And that's the only way this would work is with those supports.
Well, it helps with the needs, and they can help us address it. And as a team, it takes a lot of stress, and it helps everybody work together, and it's all for the best of the consumer.
Okay. In the last closing couple of minutes, I'm just curious to hear from each of you. Has your opinion changed from what you initially may have had as a reaction when you heard about the closure of Brandon Training School? And here, fast forward 20 years later, how has your opinion changed?
I don't know if my opinion changed so much as you sort of get used to the idea. This was going to happen regardless of how we felt. It just needed to be done. I was concerned that some people that were getting placed weren't going to fare well, survive, because they're institutionalized, and that's all they knew, basically. But it's come around full circle here, and we've I think that we've gotten got a lot accomplished, and I think everybody's set in play, and
what about Jan?
I think closing the Brandon Training School was the best thing that ever happened for the individuals who live there, and also for individuals who may have lived there, because it just created a system that was more humane, more individualized, and it works.
Well,
I think at first I was worried that the community wouldn't accept these individuals into their communities and stuff, and I was kind of worried. But since we've all come into the play, the communities are accepting them, they're opening their arms, and these people are having a really adequate and full lives out here. And at first I was worried they wouldn't, being institutionalized for so many years, but they've come a long way. The community's come and met us halfway, and I think it's working very well.
Oh, great. Well, this has been an interesting conversation, and it's hard to believe it has been 20 years since the closure of the Brandon Training School, but I appreciate you taking your time. Jim Wade, Jan Sherman, and Melody Bell, thank you for joining us on Community Care Network Connections to talk about the community-based work that you're now doing and to support the lives of people who were once or would be served at an institution like Brandon Training School. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I'm Dick Corsell, and you have been watching Community Care Network Connections.